I'm Hugh Daniso, inviting you to watch what can best be described as a regular special. North Coast Report regularly provides you with an insider's view of major local news each Thursday night at 8:30. North Coast Report is special because of the caliber and combination of journalists we feature each week for accurate and candid local news analysis. Join me each Thursday night at 8:30 for North Coast Report.
Hello, I'm Juliet Prowse, inviting you to put us on your dance card as we bring you the very best ballroom dancers from 25 nations, all competing for the #1 dance title in the world. The costumes will dazzle you, and the footwork will absolutely amaze you. The World Professional Dance Championship. Catch it right here on PBS.
Tune in tomorrow night at 10 o'clock.
Hello, I'm Louis Rukeyser, inviting you to join me for the next edition of Wall Street Week, when we'll take a family picture of Ma Bell and her offspring 1 year after their stunning breakup. My guest will be Wall Street's top telecommunications expert, James McCabe, and he'll give us his views on the outlook now for customers and investors alike. So take the phone off the hook and give us a listen.
Friday night at 8:30.
The music, Mahler, unmistakably so. The orchestra, Vienna's Philharmonic. And the conductor, Bernstein. These are the stirring sounds of Mahler's First Symphony, performed by one of the world's great orchestras, with Leonard Bernstein at the podium. The tradition continues as Bernstein conducts Mahler's Symphony No. 1. Don't miss it next time on Great Performances.
Thursday night at 10. You're watching WVIZ TV 25 Cleveland. It's 10 o'clock. Time for the military and the news media, a matter of intelligence.
This program is made possible by public television stations and in the interest of an informed public by Sperry Corporation, providing high-technology, computer-based system solutions for complex problems in business, industry, and government. This is a production of Media and Society Seminars in association with WQED Pittsburgh, WNET New York, and the Bonneville Broadcast Group.
The military and the news media, GHOSTAR, a matter of intelligence, is a hypothetical case, but the issues and the participants are real.
Mr. Schlesinger, you are the Secretary of Defense, and one of your proudest accomplishments has been the development of the GHOSTAR satellite. Is information about this GHOSTAR something that you think we ought to keep secret?
Absolutely.
All right, let's work on the story. Mr. Nelson, who are you going to talk to?
Well, I might eventually go talk to Mr. Schlesinger.
Let's hear it with Mr. Schlesinger.
Well, I've got this...
I haven't let him in my office yet.
Well, in that case, I'm going to tell you that if we don't get to talk to the Secretary of Defense, we're prepared to go with the story.
I think you'll see him.
All right, you're in.
We've had access to this document. It has to do with the satellite program that you've undertaken. And I'd like to get your comments on it and get you to tell me anything else you want to about the entire program. And if you have some reservations about our using the story, I'd like to know what they are, and I'd be glad to pass them on to the editor.
Well, thanks for dropping by, Mr. Nelson. I've heard what you've had to say, and we'll be back to you.
In other words, you're neither confirming nor denying the validity of the document.
That's our policy. That's correct.
Well, we'll go with the story.
If what you say is true, it is a matter of the highest sensitivity in the country. We will be back to you, and I expect that you will respect that period of wait.
For 2 days in December of 1984, the military and the news media gathered in Princeton, New Jersey to wrestle with the hard choices of keeping military secrets in an open society. The first case involved GHOSTAR, a spy satellite capable of monitoring radio signals and strategic missile operations of the Soviet Union. It was, of course, a hypothetical designed as a metaphor from leak to newsroom to courtroom to focus on the process by which the press and the military make their decisions. Then, 16 days later, Pentagon officials announced that on January 23rd, the Space Shuttle Discovery would be launched carrying a top-secret military payload. No hypothetical. Several newspapers and networks were called by the Secretary of Defense himself and asked to hold any stories regarding the secret payload. The Washington Post, which was not called, reported that the geosynchronous satellite would go into orbit 22,500 miles over the western portions of the Soviet Union. Secretary Weinberger accused the Post of journalistic irresponsibility and said it may have given aid and comfort to the enemy. But editor Ben Bradley defended his story as responsible, claiming that virtually all the information in the story was unclassified and could be found in technical journals. The Space Shuttle Discovery, with its 30,000-pound payload, is now on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center, and any similarity to the GHOSTAR in our scenario is coincidental. But of course, the issues are highly relevant. This seminar, one of 3 conducted on December 1st and 2nd, ran 3 hours, and we are sharing a 90-minute version of it with you now. It was edited in sequence by Media and Society Seminars of the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, which convened the seminar together with 10 major news organizations. Our moderator is Professor Charles Nesson of the Harvard Law School.
Mr. Schlesinger, you are the Secretary of Defense. One of your proudest accomplishments has been the development of the GHOSTAR satellite. As a matter of fact, the last time you were over at the White House with President Haig, Haig said to you, he said that very thing. He said, Schlesinger, I haven't seen anything like this since Star Wars. Terrific job. Is information about this GHOSTAR something that you think we ought to keep secret, Mr. Schlesinger?
Absolutely.
Tell us why.
The ability of the United States to monitor either possible threats against the security of this country and its allies, or alternatively to monitor strategic arms control agreements dependent upon our intelligence assets. If the Soviets know the capabilities, they will be in a position to design countermeasures that will lower the confidence that we can have either in the detection of a possible threat to the United States or the confidence that we have in our ability to verify arms control agreements. Therefore, the capabilities of this system must be kept secret.
President Haig, you agree with him?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's very important both for the arms control process and most importantly for our security needs.
In fact, this satellite is very important in your thinking about a negotiation that's going on now about arms control. In fact, your administration has been proceeding very favorably towards an arms control agreement. And in the back of your mind, it's GHOSTAR. That's at least one of the elements that makes you confident that this thing could work. How many people know about GHOSTAR over in the White House?
Past experience, I've limited the circle to my wife and to my chief of staff and to my security advisor.
And how many people do you think the chief of staff has limited his circle to?
He knows my policy on these things, and he probably has kept it to himself.
Meaning his wife?
Perhaps.
And his best assistant?
Perhaps.
Mr. Schlesinger, how many people know about it in your shop?
The responsibilities for this are divided between the Defense Department and the Central Intelligence Agency.
Mr. Colby over here.
Mr. Colby over here. And probably we have 50, 60 people within the DOD that know about it.
Mr. Colby, how many people know about it over in your shop?
Maybe about 25 or 30, but then the contractors that are actually doing the building of the mechanism, they know something about it too.
So we're up around 100 so far.
Each of whom knows one piece of it, perhaps, but doesn't know the whole thing.
Mr. Daly over here is the contractor. He runs Eastwell Industries. They're building the GHOSTAR. Mr. Daly, how many people in your shop know about this?
I think a few dozen probably know the whole system, and then others within the shop know compartment pieces of it. We try to limit the overall knowledge of it.
So how many are we talking about?
A few dozen at the upper levels, maybe, depending on the size of it, maybe 100 or so.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Daly. You're a publicly traded company, New York Stock Exchange. In fact, your stock has been in pretty bad shape the last few years. All of a sudden, in the last year or so, there's been a lot of push in your stock. It's going up. Something's happening at your place. Observers take a look at your firm. You're hiring people. There's a lot of stuff going on. Get a call from a reporter. Say, what's going on at your firm? How come your stock's going up? What do you tell him?
I don't tell them about that project.
That project's why it's going up. That's where the money's coming from. What do you tell them?
I tell them I haven't got a project that I can talk about that reflects that.
I haven't got a project I can talk. Suppose the call comes from the SEC. What's going on with your stock, Daly? What do you tell him?
Well, at some point, I'm going to call Mr. Schlesinger and ask him what he wants me to tell him about this thing.
Mr. Schlesinger, you just got a call from Mr. Daly. What do you say to him, Mr. Daly?
I say, Mr. Schlesinger, we've got a problem. I'm contractually bound to do what you want me to do in terms of security on this program. What do you want me to do?
I want you to maintain security, Mr. Daly.
That's what I'm going to do.
Now, as to the SEC, I call up the head of the SEC if the question has begun to be persistent, and suggest that they leave this company alone with regard to queries.
That's the way the government works. You just pick up the phone and you say, "Hi, George, I want you to leave Eastwell Industries alone as far as these queries are concerned. Thank you very much, Schlesinger." End of conversation.
With the stake that we have in this satellite system, I go over to visit the SEC directly or invite him over to come talk to me. I do not use the telephone.
And if he just happens to ask you, do you mind telling me what this is about? I do have to run a big administration. I am responsible to the public for fair dealing in stocks and so forth. Just got to take your word for it?
That's right.
That's right. And he's going to do that.
If you're a patriot, you'll take my word.
So how many people overall have we got so far? We're getting up to a couple hundred?
About that.
A couple hundred?
As the CIA responsible for the security, we would have gone through a very careful vetting and briefing of each person exposed to this particular project. He would be signing a specific agreement emphasizing the importance that he keep it totally secret and that he talk to absolutely no one not on the list about it.
The money for this project comes from Senator Cohen's committee over here. Senator Cohen, who knows about this on your committee?
Well, on the Intelligence Committee, I assume it would come to the Intelligence Committee first, perhaps the chairman and vice chairman, and perhaps the chairman of the Budget Subcommittee and the ranking minority member 4, plus maybe 2 staff members on the Intelligence Committee.
Your staff members?
The Intelligence Committee staff members.
How about your best assistant?
There would be no personal staff allowed in a meeting such as that.
So your staff would never know about this? Just you? And you have a clearance from Mr. Colby?
I have no clearance from Mr. Colby.
He didn't make you sign one of these things? Mr. Colby, you missed somebody over here.
The Senate committee in its own rules says that it'll take care of its security, and they have procedures to do that for their staff and the selection of their members.
So you trust the Senate?
I trust the chairman and the vice chairman.
You trust the chairman and the vice chairman?
If I don't get any appropriation.
And if you didn't trust the chairman and the vice chairman?
Then I'd have to figure out how to get around it. And there have been ways of making sure that the wrong people don't get on these committees. And it isn't an action that I undertake. It's an action that the Senate or the House itself takes responsibility of doing.
Mr. Ross, let me come to you. Your old friend Schlesinger has just become Secretary of Defense. And he's hired you as the public relations officer for the Department of Defense. He's hired you because he really doesn't know much about how Washington works and how information works, and you're an expert. He calls you into the office one day and he says to you, Mr. Ross, will you take me to school on this business of leaks? I mean, suppose, I'm not saying I do, but suppose I wanted to leak a document or an idea or something. How would I go about doing it?
I would ask him what sort of a subject he was interested in educating the public about.
What difference does that make?
Well, it would depend. That would give me a clue as to what reporter might be interested in the story.
How does it get from Schlesinger through? Does he call the reporter in, have him for tea?
He might.
He might.
It depends. Does the secretary wish to speak on the record, or does he want to have a background meeting with a reporter? Does he want me to handle it, or does he want to handle it himself?
Is there any, can you educate me more about how one would make that choice?
There are a limited number of reporters who can handle certain kinds of stories, and there are a limited number of publications which are particularly important in terms of transmitting important information, and those are evident to me, and they'd be evident to the secretary in quick order.
Ms. Shays, when you came into the Department of Defense as an undersecretary, did you know anything about leaking?
Yes. I had a fair idea of how the system worked.
Tell us, how does the system work?
First of all, you have friends in the press, and you can talk to them. You know that if you have a technical issue that you really wanted to discuss with somebody, you'd call Ben Schimmer, a highly technical issue. If you were interested in a policy position and you wanted to talk to somebody, you'd call Meg Greenfield. So it doesn't take very long to know who the cast of characters are, but you take these conversations very, very seriously, and you'd be much happier if Tom Ross is handling them, because you know you're playing with fire. If you venture forth on your own, you don't know where it comes out.
You're talking about legitimate information dissemination. Suppose you want to really leak something.
I think
Suppose
maybe
you want to leak something. Let's just imagine a situation in which you and Mr. Schlesinger don't see eye to eye on something. Maybe you don't see eye to eye on the way this GHOSTAR program is going. Mr. Schlesinger wants to keep this program real secret. You can see some pluses from maybe people finding out about GHOSTAR. You know if you go to Tom Ross, he's not going to say, we need any public education about GHOSTAR. How are you going to do it, Ms. Shays?
If I think there ought to be some greater public knowledge about our satellite capability, I mean, in the first place, I don't mess around with compartmentalized programs. No way would I go to the press, but if I felt...
Compartmentalized programs, just...
Highly, highly classified programs of our surveillance capabilities. No way do I mess around with the press with that. But if I felt we needed to know more, that public needed to know more about our strong verification capabilities in general, I don't go to the press. I go to Senator Cohen, my friend, because he's worried about the arms control negotiations. And I say, gee, I really think there ought to be some greater public appreciation that we have strong verification capabilities. But nobody talks about this particular program.
And you figure maybe he'll pick up the ball and run with it.
Well, there are ways in which the Senate can let it be known that the issue of verification, which is the only way that I would come into this, is an issue on which the public need not be as concerned, let's say, as it is at the moment.
Mr. Hyatt, you're sitting in your office. Telephone rings. Hello, Hyatt. You're a good reporter. Dealt with you a lot. I've got a terrific story for you. Would you meet me in a bar? Tell you who he is. He's an old acquaintance of yours who's a staffer on one of the Senate committees, giving you very good information in the past. Go see him? Sure. He says to you, Mr. Hyatt, this is a big one I got, big one. I mean, this isn't like this other stuff I've been talking to you about. Do I have your absolute assurance of confidentiality?
I say I protect my sources. If I have to make a promise before I hear what the information is, I can never absolutely promise that I won't at some point have to talk to one editor if we end up reporting something. But beyond that, yes, you have my assurance.
That's terrific, thanks. Pleased I could have this drink with you. Bye.
Oh, I say, well, where are you going?
I'm gonna go see Mr. Nelson over here. Mr. Nelson, how about you? I'm looking for real confidence.
I'd pledge.
None of this Hyatt stuff of maybe under some circumstances I might have to do something with somebody.
No qualifications.
No qualifications. You're just going to give me absolute promise.
Yeah.
You sound like my best bet, Mr. Nelson. You're not telling anybody.
That's right.
You're not telling your editor, Mr. Squires, over here?
No.
Mr. Squires, he's not telling you.
That doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me. Mr. Nelson, here's the story. There's this satellite that's been developed. It is amazing, absolutely amazing. It does things that would, I've actually heard it said, would curl George Lucas's hair. You interested?
Very.
It's got some problems with it. I mean, I think that they're oversold on it, but they're just not estimating the problems with this thing. I think it could be serious troubles down the road. A lot of money to fix it. Maybe even some serious vulnerabilities. You interested?
Very. Sounds like other cases I know about.
Yeah. You got any questions for me, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I want to know who the contractor is, when the project started.
Yeah, it's Eastwell.
Who's in charge?
Schlesinger.
Who's the immediate research and development person in charge?
No, it's in the report I've got in my briefcase. Do you want the report in that briefcase?
Love to have it.
Classified document. Still want it?
Sure.
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 All
Even
the better.
more.
All the better.
That's right.
You worried at all that you're taking a classified document from this guy if he offers it to you?
No. I think that's his problem, not mine, if there is a problem.
All right, I give it to you. Stamps all over. Copied. Where do you go from there?
Well, I take the document back first to the office, make copies of it. Then I would talk to an editor. I would tell him that I had the document and that I was pursuing a story.
Mr. Squires, he talks to you. Do you want to know where he got the document?
I do. I wish he didn't have the document. I want him to know what's in there. I want to know what's in there. But the fact that he has the document and didn't talk to me is the reason that I have gray hair and he doesn't.
Why do you wish he didn't have the document?
I don't think that accepting classified documents and holding them as source material for newspapers is a very wise policy. That does not mean I wouldn't support what he has done or that I have not done it myself.
Why don't you just say to him, Nelson, cut it out?
I think that is done. I would have said, Jack, take some very good notes on that document and call me back.
What do you do with advice like that, Mr. Nelson?
Well, I don't think I would have sought advice like that. I think I would have taken the document first and come to the office and talk to him after I had it. I think any reporter would.
Got a little problem here between you two people.
That's a problem between us all the time. I was on his side for a long time.
So, Mr. Nelson, who do you give those copies to?
Other editors.
Do you care at all that you may be dealing with national security secrets?
Well, I'm aware of the fact that it's a national security secret, at least it's classified that way, but I'm also aware that there may be real problems with this project, that there's somebody who's involved in it who's concerned that maybe money is being misspent, that there are irregularities in the program, and that maybe the reason for the secrecy is to prevent embarrassment as much as it is national security.
Mr. Colby was being very careful about who gets information. You don't sound like you're being very careful.
Well, that's not my business to be careful about it after I get it.
Just not your business.
Well, supposedly, hopefully it's going to wind up in the paper, and there are going to be a lot of people who know about it.
Mr. Schimmer, who would see this document if it came to you?
Only me, unless I suspected that it were a trapped document or a rigged document.
A rigged trapped document?
Right.
As you were being set up?
Well, set up in the sense that someone was leaking it to me in order to try and track down another leak. So I'd find a way to compare it with the real such document. To make sure that the real story wasn't that James Schlesinger is $2 billion over cost on this program, that Bill Colby is 18 months late in launching it because Mr. Daley picked the wrong launch vehicle and because the head of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration sold him a bill of goods that he could design it for the space shuttle when the space shuttle, it finally turned out, wouldn't lift anywhere near the payload. That may be the real story. I'd want to find out why you leaked it to me. What's your motive? Why do you want this story out?
Does it make a difference to you?
You're damn right.
Suppose I want it out because I want to embarrass Schlesinger. I don't like him.
Tell me your story.
Suppose I want it out because I don't like the way the arms negotiation treaty's going. I think maybe this will slow it up. I think the arms negotiation treaty is bad policy for the United States.
Okay, let me read the document. I'll get back to you. You want to, or can we talk about some questions now?
That satisfied you, that motivation? That made you feel good about me?
No, you answered a question. I'm not going to tell you whether I feel good or bad.
You said you're going to compare my document with the real document.
I think so.
How are you going to get the real document?
That's none of your business.
You're confident you'd be able to get the real document?
Pretty confident.
You won't tell us here how you do it, because that's your business.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think, President Haig?
What I have to put up with.
How do you think he's going to get a look at the real document?
Well, I don't think he is quite as cocksure as he sounds. However, he could probably contrive an approach to a senior official, including perhaps the Secretary of Defense, in which he'd have an opportunity to verify that at least he's holding a legitimate piece of paper.
So you think he could do it?
I think so, at some risk to the secrecy of the fact that he has what he has.
Miss Reeser, is this a kind of story that would come to you?
I think it would on whether the satellite worked or not, but the classification problem would be something that I wouldn't deal with. If it was, I would take the unclassified portions of it, or I may tell a reporter somebody has something classified, but I would not be in the classification loop.
Who are you?
Well, I run the project on military procurement. And
a project on military procurement. What do you procure?
Documents. No, what we try to do is we try to be the buffer zone between people who want to leak documents and the press and the Congress.
You try to be the buffer zone between?
Yeah, so we protect the press from the source and the source from the press, and also...
So you're doing Mr. Ross's job here?
In a way, yeah. But also you have to understand that a lot of people do come with biases. everybody's got a bias when they're in their own little shop, and it's part of my job to check out that bias and to see if they've got legitimate documentation and whether it's something that I feel I can go to a group of reporters with.
This is a legitimate, above-board organization.
Absolutely.
And your purpose in life as an organization is to funnel information from leakers to the press.
As long as they have documentation and they aren't doing it for some sour grapes reason.
Good information.
Good information on stuff, weapons that don't work, cost overruns, things like that. Most of the documents I get are from the service that it affects. And I get it from military men and from civilians. It's very hard. When these people come to me, it's a very hard decision for them because they're usually career people.
So you, if I understand it right, you are institutionally in the leaking business.
Yeah, born to leak.
Born to leak.
She's a kind of a fence.
She's a kind of a fence. Ms. Rezor, would you get this kind of a document?
I wouldn't accept a classified document. If I was a reporter and I had Time Inc. or New York Times behind me, I would consider it. But you understand, I've got 5 people, no legal money, nothing.
You figure they could wipe you out?
Oh, yeah. Well, and there's 2 reasons. One, it's against the law. They could wipe me out. But number 2, they'd use that to discredit me to the sources inside the Pentagon. Because the people inside the Pentagon that leak to me aren't trying to leak to hurt national security. And if I was willing to be so flipped as to just go ahead and take classified documents and I make the judgment on it, then they would think that maybe I wasn't doing it for legitimate reasons.
Why do you think Nelson takes the document? You don't.
Because he's a reporter.
He's a reporter.
I think that they have the facilities to, 1, protect themselves, 2, they have lawyers to advise them, they have a group of editors to say to them, make the national security decision. I just don't feel right that I could make that national security decision.
Huh. Mr. E. Clay, what do you think about Ms. Rezor's operation?
I think if it were known more widely to the American people, 100 million voters who may not have that much patience for all these games, thinking of their taxpayers' dollars spent on defense and on national security concerns and anxieties they have, they would be rather disdainful, to put it mildly.
That's not what happens when I go to radio talk shows. I've found in the last 4 years people are very positive about the idea that there's people inside who want to make weapons work. The thing that disgusts the people the most is they spend the money and the stuff isn't working, or they find out about the spare parts.
But let's fix it here. Here we're talking about the process of leaking a information system that can help us to get arms control negotiations and intelligence.
But if it doesn't work...
The question is, can we make those distinctions?
If it doesn't work, isn't that just a big bluff? I mean, if we're able to find out that it doesn't work, and if it's widely known to 100 to 150 people that it's not working, it's falling apart, you don't think the Soviets are eventually going to figure that out? And it's going to be a big game, back and forth.
Mr. Sauter, how would you check the story out?
It's perhaps time to run some traps in the Senate, in the defense community, and see what we can come up with.
Mr. Schorr, talk to Mr. Sauter for me, would you?
I think we're involved here in possibly two stories. Are they covering up a very expensive system which doesn't have the potential for working just because of the imperative that's built into military procurement, and they're going ahead with it and not going to stop it, and that's so people certainly ought to know. And we may not have to give all the details in the classified document. We can do the story, keeping secret what ought to be secret, but still saying there is a scandal of procurement there. And the other side of it is to develop, which is difficult because we have to protect our source, that there are people constantly leaking because they have an interest in shooting down the arms control policy, which has happened in the Pentagon before. And I think that is another public scandal of sabotage of presidential policies, which the public also ought to know about. There are two stories there.
Do you have more than one copy of the document?
I can make them for you if you want.
No, I would appreciate your taking the document you have, locking it in your safe, and I'm going to make some checks on the legality of what we're doing here in terms of the possession of the document.
Who are you going to consult with, Mr. Floyd?
I call Mr. Abrams.
Let's have it.
Floyd, we have a reporter who has come in possession of a classified document which looks as though it may lead us to a significant political story, perhaps a significant technical story. It could have significant ramifications on the government's ability to achieve very precise, important goals in the near future. This document was given to us. We paid no money for it. It is classified with whatever the appropriate classification may be. We have a copy, and it's locked in a safe. Do you have any thoughts, Floyd?
How highly classified is it?
We don't even recognize the stamps on this thing.
To the best of our knowledge, there is not more than 100 people in the government who know of its existence.
Well, there are some problems, probably surmountable problems, but there are some problems. There are various sections of the espionage law, which I'll have to have a look at again, but one of them relates to the possession of documents relating to the national defense. This is a situation where if they became upset enough, they could convene a grand jury. They could try to find out your confidential sources, for example. They could even try to get a search warrant. I wouldn't have a lot of copies of this around. And I think that you ought to maintain a very high degree of security within CBS itself about the document.
Mr. Abrams, I don't hear anything in what you're saying that's leading up to saying, hey, look, you shouldn't have this document. Give it back.
I'm not going to tell him to give it back because although there are some legal risks in him keeping it, and it's my job to tell him what those legal risks are, it is not, in my view, his obligation enforceable at law to give it back. In any event, what I want to do is tell him what the risks are. I want to tell him what possibilities might occur. I don't view it as my function to transmit documents back to the government. I would tell him one other thing. I'd tell him not to let the people in the government know that he has the document.
Excuse me, this officer of the court is covering up what may be a crime. Is that the advice that you're going to give?
Well, I'm passing judgment as to whether it would be a crime, and I'm giving advice to my client as to different sorts of behavior that he might follow in what is conceitedly a delicate area. But I am not in a position to, and I think it would be wrong, to coin a phrase, for me to tell him that it is his absolute legal obligation to return a document when I think that there are probably valid legal defenses against it.
Let's work on the story. Mr. Nelson, who are you going to talk to?
Well, I might eventually go talk to Mr. Schlesinger. If I was relatively sure at that time, I might go to him. Well, I'd have to be pretty sure before I'd go to him.
Mr. Abrams is a little worried about your letting the government know that you've got this document.
Well, I understand that. I don't have to tell him that I have the possession of the document. I can tell him I've seen the document, though.
Let's hear it with Mr. Schlesinger.
Well, I've got this...
I haven't let him in my office yet.
Yeah, that's right.
He's over there trying to get in with...
You're going to make him go through Mr. Ross here?
Damn right.
Yeah, but Mr. Ross is going to send me there immediately when I tell him that I've had access to a highly classified document that concerns a satellite.
Not necessarily.
Well, in that case, I'm going to tell you that if we don't get to talk to the Secretary of Defense, we're prepared to go with the story.
I think you'll see him.
All right, you're in.
We've had access to this document. It has to do with the satellite program that you've undertaken. And I've talked to the original source, who's someone I know and trust. I believe the document's valid. I've talked to another source who I trust. I believe now that we have a full story here, and I'd like to get your comments on it and get you to tell me anything else you want to about the entire program. And if you have some reservations about our using the story, I'd like to know what they are, and I'd be glad to pass them on to the editor.
Well, thanks for dropping by, Mr. Nelson. I've heard what you've had to say, and we'll be back to you.
In other words, you're neither confirming nor denying validity of the document.
That's our policy, that's correct.
Well, we'll go with the story. And we'll say you've been given the opportunity to talk to us about the story and to tell us either more about the program or deny the authenticity of it, and that you refuse to do so.
I have not refused to do so. As of this moment, I have refrained from comment. If what you say is true, it is a matter of the highest sensitivity in the country. We will be back to you, and I expect that you will respect that period of wait.
I would pass that on to Mr. Squires.
I've got to find out more about your reputation, the organization's reputation. I've got to see if you're a headstrong reporter who insists on charging ahead, whether we can head you off at the pass by dealing with your editor, whom I haven't heard from, but I presume we can get to know.
How much time do you ask them for?
I say we need a couple of days, a day or two.
Day or two. Day or two.
And I say that we're prepared to run the story tomorrow unless the editor decides to give you an extra day.
I think your editor will. I hope he has better judgment than you.
Because you're going to call him, aren't you, and ask him to kill a story?
No. I'm certainly going to call him. I'm going to see what we can do about preventing the story appearing.
That's what I said.
You're more indelicate than I.
Now let's go through it carefully, Mr. Schlesinger. Nelson's just left your office. He's gotten nothing from you except a request for a little time. You don't know yet what he's going to do. But tell us what you're going to do now.
I'm going to summon Mr. Ross up there, and he is going to get a quick briefing on the sensitivity of this story. I'm simultaneously going to place a call to Mr. Colby. I may or may not have placed a call to the FBI, and I will begin to contemplate going across the river and telling the president that there is a story out that could well endanger our arms control negotiations.
What goes on at this meeting? Give us an idea. What do you say to Mr. Colby?
Well, the basic question here is, how do we staunch the flow of blood? Given the way Nelson came into my office and given his reputation, he's going with the story. There's not much point in talking further to Nelson.
I would recommend to the secretary that he not go over Nelson's head until I had a chance to talk to Nelson and maybe convince him that we needed a little time and we wanted to possibly put him in touch with some people who might give him good cause not to print the story.
Why do you think that will work, Mr. Ross?
Well, I think knowing that Nelson is a good and responsible journalist, I think he might be subject to some persuasion, at least in terms of the timing of the story, whereas if the secretary goes over his head to his editor, the situation might be so inflamed that the story will inevitably be printed.
Let's see you persuade him not to go with this story.
Well, I have to get approval from the secretary to go to Nelson. And
Mr. Secretary, you going to approve that?
I figure this just might buy us a little time. So I say go ahead.
You're going to set Nelson up with people who will talk to him in ways that not only verify what he's got, but may even expand it. Does that sound like a good deal for you, Jack?
That's exactly what I'm looking for, sure. That's what I had hoped you would do. And I would like to hear all the reasons we shouldn't run it.
I'm not assuring you that that's going to happen. I'm buying a little time because it may not be possible for the secretary to allow anyone to talk.
You mean you're conning me then, essentially?
No, I am, while the secretary is determining what he's going to do, I am in good faith offering the possibility that one of the outcomes might be that someone can speak to you.
Is this something you would check out with your editor before you made some sort of deal like that with Ross?
Yeah, I wouldn't make that deal without consulting with an editor on it.
Mr. Kovat, should he make that deal?
I think he almost has to.
I think he has to make the
Almost has to, yeah. Even though they're trying to put us in deep freeze. The government has agreed to sit down and begin to discuss the story in some detail. We need more information. Well, that's where it's going to go, but it's also going to go toward delaying. We're into damage control now.
What do you mean by deep freeze? What's deep freeze?
Well, this is the first move to block the story for a day. You buy a day, and as I say, it's the damage control. I mean, you're going down that road to keep the story out of the paper one day at a time.
Does it bother you that day?
Sure, it always bothers.
What bothers you about the day?
That you have information you can't get to your readers. It always bothers you.
Does it bother you a little more if Mr. Squire's paper across town might have the story too?
Absolutely.
Let's pursue it a little bit, Mr. Nelson. Do you really have any disposition to hold on to this story?
Well, the only...
Or are you conning him?
Well, the only reason I might hold on to it would be to get further explanation from the government on what the program was about and so forth. Otherwise, no, I wouldn't have any disposition to hold on to it at all. And if I thought he was conning me, I wouldn't recommend to the editor that we hold on to it. I'd say let's go with it and get their comment the next day.
So if they want your story held up, Mr. Colby's right. They're really going to have to deal with your editor at some point.
I think that's right, sure.
Mr. Colby, who should deal with his editor?
Somebody of prominence, like the Secretary or National Security Advisor, somebody like that, or myself.
Would you consider having President Haig do it?
Probably not. We would certainly report the incident to President Haig and take his guidance, but I doubt that he would want to involve himself, and I doubt that the rest of the government would recommend that he do.
What do you think, President Haig?
Certainly not initially.
Not at this juncture, no. I think that would be a degree of overkill at this point.
You don't see the President of the United States calling up Mr. Kovac?
No. I do think that once the matter is brought to my attention, that there are a number of things I would like to know before we start a process, either of trying to kill the story. A number of these questions involve first, what is the essence of the story itself? Is it a question of a technical fallibility in a system? If it is not, and it's rather just the exposure of the system itself and the political issue of opponents to arms control versus advocates for arms control, then clearly we would have to parse out in great detail whether or not the damage limiting process, which is underway, would not suggest that the revelation of this story might be an enhancement to arms control.
Oh, you're thinking a different way here.
Of course. And I would go through my rain dance with both of the gentlemen who brought this horror to my attention, and remind them again that their departments leak like sieves, and I would hope that they would start a very prompt investigation of where this leak might have come from.
We think, Mr. President, that it was not the department or the agency, but we have pretty good indications it may have come from Capitol Hill.
The White House? Jim, I've heard that from you before.
It might sometime be true.
Mr. Schlesinger, how do you go about killing this story?
About this time, one way or another, I'm having conversation with the editor, or Bill Colby is having conversation with the editor.
Speak to Mr. Kovac for us.
This is a matter of the highest national priority. If this story appears, the likelihood of our being able to proceed with this arms control measure will be very much in danger. But as I've indicated, there is presidential concern here, and I will have to talk further with him. It may be, since he's an old friend of your publisher, that he will be giving your publisher a jingle.
We have to talk about it. I understand what you're saying, but we need to, we have a story here that we believe is important for the American public because they have a tremendous investment and involvement in this process, and so far they've been cut out of it. They know nothing about these details, and it seems to us from what my reporters told me that there are severe problems with this program. There are technological problems, there may be bureaucratic problems, and not the least problem is that there are opponents of your process within the administration that believe this information is important to get out because you're going down the wrong road in your negotiations with the Soviets. If you're saying that there is a vital national security involved in the technology, there may be something we can talk about, but I'll have to consult with my editors in New York and get back to you within the hour because we're in a hurry with this story.
Mr. Schlesinger, do you actually believe that he's persuadable?
The editor is persuadable. The reporter is probably not persuadable.
You also can help the editor as to how it should be written, so that the story puts the stress on the main story that Mr. Schorr was talking about without going into the technology and without revealing the part that the Russians could frustrate.
What you want to do, Mr. Colby, is you want to negotiate out the story with
That's
Mr.
right.
Kovacs.
If necessary. I'd like to kill it. But if they're not going to stop, and if they're not convincible, then at least try to get them to reduce the edges of it.
Mr. Schorr, you bridled a little bit when Mr. Schlesinger said, hey, the reporter, you can't persuade him, but maybe you can work with the editor.
I take exception to the statement, and I would suggest to you that if you want to enter into negotiation about the content of a story, you're better off dealing with a reporter who's by now intimate with the details of the story that the editor doesn't fully grasp. If you say, listen, the worst part of that story is this, and you don't need it to tell your story, we could do business.
I'm not yet interested in doing business with you. Maybe Bill is prepared to do business with you. At the moment, I'm still...
I think the decision is the president's as who does business with whom.
Sounds like the president's ready to do business with a lot of people.
But he's the guy with the authority.
Mr. Schorr, let me ask you a question. Have you ever held a story?
Oh, about 3 or 4 times in my career, but not really. National security wasn't it. What I try to weigh is the human cost of a story. And there are occasions in a story where I say the story is not worth the human cost that's involved.
Are you at all worried that they're going to start to take legal moves against you to stop you from going with this story? Mr. Sauter, are you worried?
Not yet.
Why not?
I haven't heard any signals yet. They always signal before they do that. There are things said to the reporter. Your lawyer in these kind of matters may receive a phone call saying, are you aware of that? There's always a signal.
I think the recommendation to the president would be to talk to the Attorney General about whether there's enough of a case to get an injunction, and to do it just for the Attorney General and a couple of his friends to consider the possibilities. That in addition to the sweetness and light negotiating with the press, you also look at the other arm you can possibly use if the case can be made that it's serious enough. If it exposes the United States to irreparable damage in the next couple of years when we don't have any satellite coverage, then I think we might have a case.
So you'd be advising Mr. Haig to talk to his lawyer?
To the Attorney General.
Mr. Rose, you're our Attorney General. Mr. Haig wants some advice from you. He wants to know, what are his legal possibilities?
Well, I'd have to advise him that the legal possibilities for killing this story are not overwhelming based upon the legal precedents that we have. We've just had 2 real ones. One was the set of opinions in the Pentagon Papers case, which if I assume we're talking about a prior restraint of publication by a newspaper. I think a standard that emerges is direct, immediate, and irreparable damage to the national security.
Well, first of all, injunction doesn't help in this case. Once we go in for an injunction, and aside from the Atomic Energy Act, the legal basis is very weak in this area. Once we go in for an injunction, we've already alerted to the Soviets to the fact that we've got a secret that is so important that the United States government is prepared to run all of these risks again. That will not escape the intelligence people in Moscow.
I completely agree with Jim. I think that's why the legal weapons here are so crude, and I'm sorry that recently we have descended to them, seemingly because of the declension of standards on all sides of governmental activity in terms of what people are willing to print and what people are willing to talk about.
Are you saying prior restraint, even if you could get it, would be worthless?
It's only for the education of the next culprit that we sue this particular journal. In this case, the damage is done by the publication or the knowledge that the government is seeking to suppress publication. In both cases, the damage is about equivalent. Prior restraint is the worst option, because if I go in and try and get an injunction out against these people, they are inclined, or most of them will be inclined, to make sure that the technology gets out.
Mr. Sauter, telephone call from Mr. Schlesinger. He says to you, Mr. Sauter, we'd really like you to hold this story. Deep freeze it, in fact. That is, will you be willing to hold up on your story long enough to give our lawyers time to go to court to seek a prior restraint?
I would say I very much appreciate your calling. I understand the significance of this issue and the source of your concern. And those concerns will be given absolute consideration in our editorial discussions on the broadcasting of this story. I see at this stage absolutely no reason to engage in a legal dialogue on these issues.
Now, there's no deal.
No deal on a legal issue, no.
He says to you, it's going to take us at least 12 hours to gear up to get to court. Will you hold the story at least 12 hours, Sauter?
And I would say to him, if you are asking us to engage in a legal dialogue with you as to our rights in broadcasting this story, I'm not going to engage in that kind of conversation at all. We are going to make an editorial decision as to whether or not to run this story as we now have the story. Thank you for calling. But I would certainly interpret from what you have just said that they are beginning to mobilize the Attorney General's office to somehow preclude the broadcasting of this story.
Yes, exactly.
And at that point, I would get a hold of Mr. Abrams.
What I'm interested in is whether it's part of your decisional process to try and beat them to the courthouse with your story.
It may very well be a desire to beat them to the courthouse.
Well, let's just follow this one through. Mr. Abrams, he wants your advice as to whether he should try and beat Schlesinger to the courthouse.
If we really
That's
think...
not the question I'm posing. Whether or not we beat him to the courthouse is our decision. I'd like to know from him the ramifications of a go, no-go decision.
Okay.
Well, if you go, there's no prior restraint. Once the story's out, the story is out. You're under no legal obligation. You're under no ethical obligation. You're under no patriotic obligation to submit this to a judge before you decide whether to broadcast. And so for those reasons, if we really think that they're about to go to court, and if we really think that you're entitled to broadcast the story, I think you ought to go ahead promptly.
Ms. Greenfield, you're listening to what Mr. Abrams says there?
He's right. And
He's right.
And they're right to say we will listen to you respectfully. We would like to hear what you have to say about our story. We will resist being told by you or by the court whether or not we can print it, and we will make the decision. We are reasonable people sometimes, and we're trying to be reasonable now. We will not cooperate with you in taking us into court. It's our decision, not yours, not the court's.
Mr. Lynch, Mr. Rose over here, in giving advice to the president, was very skeptical of the government's ability to win a prior restraint suit. What would you assess their chances?
I think the chances are probably greater than he indicated. I think that a number of developments in this area that have taken place since 1971 when the Pentagon Papers case was decided would indicate that as a legal matter, the chances of getting a prior restraint on publication are probably greater. Also, the atmospherics of the case are a lot different than the Pentagon Papers case. Here, the government's going to be able to talk about high-tech, very important current intelligence gathering sources. You're not going to be dealing with something that was perceived as a historical set of papers, as was the case in 1971.
Here we talk about prior restraint and protecting security, I think, is it not true that in the Pentagon Papers case and the Progressive case, that the government went into court to prevent publication of material that we discovered already had been published? I mean, it seems to me that their notion of prior restraint is profoundly flawed. They don't even know what it is that has and has not been published in open literature.
Yeah, but now this case is much stronger, because here we're sure none of this GHOSTAR stuff is out.
They were sure in those cases, too. That's why they went to court.
Judge Byrne, the case comes in front of you. This is a case for injunction. Their lawyers do not succeed in demonstrating that this has already been out. They submit a document to you. By the way, Mr. Rose, are we going to be able to submit the documents to him secretly so we don't have to just lay all this out?
I think we'd try that first.
We're going to try and explain it to him?
In camera, yeah.
In camera, secret. In camera, they explain it all to you, Judge Byrne, and you are convinced, reading the documents, that if this stuff comes out, the United States is basically deprived of satellite coverage, effective satellite coverage of the Soviet Union for a period of 3 years. That's what you accept as a proposition of fact. They want a prior restraint. Going to give it to them?
At the district court level, I'd have to look at the only precedent that we have, and that is the Pentagon paper case. I would have to make a determination, as you say, in camera, whether it's going to be grave and irreparable and immediate damage to the United States, which is not a particularly easy chore, incidentally, looking at technical materials in camera and making that decision. I believe that I have to first say that I think a prior restraint is ineffective for the reason Mr. Lynch said, that it was probably going to be published by the time I even get a chance to look at it. But I believe that the restraint would not be returned. I do not believe that I'd return an injunction prohibiting the publishing of the materials based upon the legal precedents that we now have.
By the way, Judge, do you have a security clearance?
No. I did. Whether it's still in effect or not, I don't know. It's probably not.
Mr. Colby, are we going to worry about him when we submit all this stuff to him?
I think we'd ask the Attorney General to submit as much on affidavit as we could and leave out the technology, but hope to convince the judge that he didn't need to know the details of the technology.
Judge Scalia...
No, I think Judge Byrne probably called it right. I'd have to hear argument from all and sundry, but my guess is, on the basis of the statutes I know, that that this looks like a loser for the government. It's hard for the courts to make the calls in this area. I am pretty much compelled to accept the government's assessment, and it's very difficult for me to get into what are the real issues in this case. Perhaps the real problem is that that in fact within the Pentagon itself there's some disagreement over how many satellites there ought to be. All of those great arguments as to why this really doesn't impair the national security, why the government is just sending up a pretext about impairing the national security. They may be perfectly true, but it's very difficult for me to assess them as a judge. You know, Judge Byrne and I don't make the rules, we just apply the statutes. Some societies have an Official Secrets Act, the British do, where if it's secret, stamped secret, and it's disclosed, it's a violation. Now that I can decide, but our statutes don't read that way, and if they don't, my hands are pretty much tied.
You are watching the military and the news media, GHOSTAR, a matter of intelligence. As you have heard, the participants in our hypothetical case rejected the use of prior restraints, censorship, a gag by the courts. For under our First Amendment, prior restraint is not possible unless the government can prove irreparable damage to the national security. So the next question in our case study is what option the government has in finding and prosecuting the person or persons responsible for the leak of highly classified information. Here, in our hypothetical, we ask you to imagine that the leaker was a congressional aide.
Mr. Lynch, let's imagine the prosecution here of, let's take the Senate staff person. You're defending that person. Tell us your strategy.
As long as he hasn't leaked information relating to communications intelligence.
No, it's just this satellite here, and it's not
just this
communications
satellite.
intelligence.
And he hasn't given it to the Russians.
No, he just gave it to Nelson.
There's no statute that makes that a crime. There is a statute which makes national defense, makes the revelation of national defense information a crime.
That's what this is.
And that's only been used one time.